we're going to be joined here in a moment by Vivek Ramaswamy, who has done a great job with his most recent book, Woke Inc., which debuted at number 2 overall on the New York Times bestseller list. And I believe we have Vivek with us now. And I appreciate you making the time. Vivek, I want to start with this. I don't know if you've been paying attention to the Joe Rogan controversy and also to the controversies out there surrounding Candace Owens, but she requested a COVID test and the company refused service to her, which is, I think, one of the trend lines that we're seeing with woke corporations deciding whether or not to give medical treatment to people they either agree or disagree with. How big of a trend do you think this is becoming, and where did it start?
Yeah, look, Clay, I think it's becoming rampant. It is everywhere across America. It is ubiquitous. That's part of why I wrote the book. And I think that it needed to be called out because the origin story wasn't even earnest on either side. It didn't begin with politics. It began with self-interest. That was the 2008 financial crisis, where after the 2008 financial crisis, corporations were the bad guys. They were the guys that the old left wanted to take money from and redistribute it to poor people for the benefit of poor people. Agree or not, that's what the old left wanted to say. But there was this newly emergent identity politics-focused left, what we think of as the new woke progressive left, that actually said the real problem wasn't economic injustice, it wasn't poverty, it was actually racial injustice and misogyny and bigotry. And that presented the opportunity of a generation for big business in this country to say that, okay, if we can hitch ourselves to that part of the left, then we can put the old left up for adoption. And so you had a bunch of woke millennials that get in bed with a bunch of big banks. Together they birthed woke capitalism, and they put Occupy Wall Street up for adoption. But this is the other side of that trade, where if anyone who defects from that woke orthodoxy is going to have economic muscle and economic power leveraged against them to be able to increasingly be banished from civil society itself. And part of why I wrote the book is I have some pretty clear ideas of solutions that we can use from a policy perspective and a cultural perspective to get our way out of that cultural quagmire. But that is where we are today.
Vivek, it's Buck. We got an audience here that is very activated and wants to take action on things like this. So we'll certainly get to that with you in a second. for more background on this, and I know you did a lot of research on it for the book, and congrats on how well it's doing. In general, and I know that there's going to be specifics here and there. There's the people who say, go woke, go broke. And then the people who say, actually, this works out really well, meaning that progressive politics in the short term help the bottom line of some of these major, whether it's, Disney or Google or, Coca-Cola or whomever. What do you find on balance is more true? Is this financially incentivized for them in the beginning to have these very progressive and exclusionary for conservatives and people that believe in traditional values politics, or are they suffering and there therefore is some kind of a mechanism built in for correction?
So it's a great question. So I think it's about 75-25. I think in about 75% of the cases, companies are doing what they perceive to be in their self-interest. Now, whether or not it is in their self-interest, time will tell. And I think that 75% number is going to actually be lower, the number of companies that discover that they're leaving a lot of market share on the table by failing to service conservative audiences or even just not apolitical audiences who are actually turned off by this stuff. I think Nike may find themselves in that category. I think Coca-Cola may find themselves in that category, but that time will tell. However, I do think that in the majority of cases, you actually have companies that think they are doing the thing that better empowers them to ultimately make a buck in the future. I think the other 25% is in a different category, where they're actually pursuing these values authentically. And I think one of the things I discovered over writing the book is if I had to pick, I began the book taking aim at the hypocritical, scammy kind of woke capitalism, where people are using the appearance of caring about something other than profit and power precisely to gain more profit and power. But actually the thing I learned personally is that I'm even more frightened by the people who use their market power authentically to force their values down the throats of the American people. I put Jack Dorsey in this category, where the guy doesn't need another dollar. He doesn't care if he makes another dollar. He has tens of billions of dollars. But the rate limiter for his power in society isn't the amount of dollars that he has. It is the scope of what money itself can buy. And so what he's decided is to use his platform as a mechanism for effectuating his vision for what can and can't be discussed or should or shouldn't be discussed online. he's one example among many in that other 25% category where they don't care if it hits the bottom line or not. They can afford that. You want to use this as a you only live once philosophy to use their corporate platform to ultimately legislate through the back door what they could never do if they were actually held democratically accountable. So it's a little bit of both.
We're talking to Vivek Ramaswamy. I'd encourage you to check out his book, Woke Inc., debuted at number 2 overall on the New York Times list. Vivek, I want to go into this discussion. I came from sports, and I feel like sports was on the cutting edge, unfortunately, for embracing Woke Inc. You mentioned Nike. Colin Kaepernick is a big part of this. The NBA is among the wokest organizations anywhere in the entirety of America. The NFL has followed behind it. Even Major League Baseball pulling their All-Star game out of Atlanta. All of that has been on the front edge of what many other corporations have followed. Do you buy into the idea that sports has helped to drive the cultural move to Woke Inc.? I see sports fans fundamentally rejecting it, to go to Buck's point on go woke, get broke. Do you buy into that? What did your data show you about the sports industry in particular and its impact in the world of woke culture?
Yeah, so there's 2 key points about sports in particular, Clay. One is that this used to be the space that brought us together in a divided polity like the United States. And we are a divided country politically. We can still survive as a politically divided country. We can't survive as a politically divided country if we also lack apolitical spaces that we can still come together in the baseball stadiums of this country, in the football stadiums of this country, in the basketball stadiums of this country. Those are the places that brought us together, whether we're black or white or Democrat or Republican. And I think a divided polity, even a severely divided body politic, can survive, but it cannot survive if we lose those apolitical sanctuaries. That's the first thing I'd say. The second thing I'd say, though, is that the sports associations are among the worst culprits in actually geopolitically empowering China at the expense of the United States. And I'll tell you exactly what I mean. When you have an organization like the NBA or a superstar like LeBron James that relentlessly, and I mean relentlessly, criticizes the United States and alleged social injustice here and racism and microaggressions here at home, without saying a peep about actual human rights abuses in China, what they are effectively doing is creating a false moral equivalence between Chinese nihilism and American idealism on the global stage. And that helps China because now when Xi Jinping is pressed by the EU or the UN on the Uyghur human rights crisis, where he has over 1 million Uyghurs enslaved in concentration camps, subject to forced sterilization, in what I consider to be one of the worst human rights abuses by a major nation since the Third Reich of Germany, they are able to say to the UN and to the EU that Black Lives Matter shows that the United States is no better, and that China hopes the United States does better on human rights, which is what their top diplomat said to us in Alaska this month. That would be laughable if it weren't for the fact that folks like LeBron James actually come to China's public defense after Daryl Morey, the general manager of the Houston Rockets, tweets, "Fight for freedom, stand with Hong Kong." LeBron James is actually the first person to come to China's public defense. And so that actually erodes the greatest asset of the United States of all, which is our cultural and our moral standing on the global stage. That's even more important than our nuclear arsenal, in my opinion. And a lot of these sports associations kowtowing to China, they're bowing to their true Chinese overlords to be able to expand into the lucrative Chinese market. They're unwilling to criticize the Chinese Communist Party, but they're reserving their moral outrage for the United States in a way that hurts us on both ends of the trade.
All right, Vivek, this is where we get to tell everybody listening, what can they do? I mean, we always say, and we absolutely mean it from the bottom of our hearts, the sponsors, for example, we have on this show, they're standing with our message, with our free speech. So there's an action item, in a sense, of supporting those creators who speak out in front of those voices who speak out in favor of freedom and the Constitution and just sanity in public life. But if people want to tackle Woke Inc. out there, what else can they do?
Look, I think that the most important battle line right now is in our schools. It is in the minds of the next generation of Americans. And I think that anybody who has a parent who has kids in schools, be they public or private, to be able to stand up for an ideology that we teach in the schools that ultimately revives American idealism rather than constantly criticizing the United States so much so that the next generation doesn't even know what those ideals are. I think that's the single most important battle line for anybody who's a parent. Now, I think that there's a lot of people who come out on the side of consumer boycotts, boycotting woke brand and sort of trying to create a new right-wing or conservative or even apolitical alternative. I'm actually, while I understand the appeal of that, I'm less a fan of that because at the end of the day, as I said earlier, if we have two forms of coffee, if we have two forms of baseball, at the end of this, we're not going to have a country left at the end of it, even though that might be a great opportunity for a conservative entrepreneur. And if this were Shark Tank and you have a guy who's half competent who wants to start that business, I'd say bet on it as an investment prospect. I would say that as a matter of leaving America better off in the end, I'm not as drawn to that set of solutions as I am to fostering civic identity, fostering shared civic identity in the next generation in our schools. I think that's where I'm most focused. That being said, I think there's also some policy solutions that can make a real difference in the short run. You have companies that are using their economic muscle to be able to discriminate against one side of the political spectrum. I say that if you can't discriminate against somebody because they're black or gay or Muslim or white or Christian or Jewish or whatever, you should not be able to discriminate against them just because of their political perspectives either. That brings us back to the Candace Owens example in the beginning. If you can't discriminate against somebody on the basis of the color of their skin, you shouldn't be able to do it on the basis of their political perspective either. Same goes for just as you can't on the basis of religion. You can't be able to do it on the basis of their expressed political beliefs. I think we could easily make that change. Add it to Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. Put political speech and political belief right up there next to race, sex, religion. I think that should be the top of the conservative agenda. I think we have a lot of Republicans right now who are fearful of doing anything that defies their orthodoxy that they memorized 80 years or 40 years ago in 1980, which said the free market can do no wrong, without recognizing that the free market that they idealize doesn't actually exist today.
Yeah, I agree with you. Defending individual rights is the opposite of big government, as conservatives like to say. But Vivek, Woke Inc. is the book, man. We really appreciate you being with us. Best of luck, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for having me. Talk to you guys.